Hey, Freak Show! You're going nowhere! I got you for 3 minutes! 3 minutes of playtime!
So Sam Raimi's Spider-Man from 2002 tells the story of Peter Parker, played by Tobey Maguire, who is bitten by a radioactive spider and then develops all of the powers of a spider and becomes Spider-Man ultimately. So I want to go ahead and just say that these films, this one especially, and this one, all hold a special place in my heart. These films were just so important to me when I was a kid, especially Spider-Man 1 and 2. When I became obsessed with this, Spider-Man 3 hadn't come out yet. So I saw Spider-Man 2 in the theater when I was a little kid, loved it. And I had to watch the first Spider-Man like every single day of my life. I loved Spider-Man, everything Spider-Man. The 60s cartoons, I used to watch that. The animated series from the 90s. There's the two shows from the 80s that involved Spider-Man that I watched. Even that live-action Spider-Man movie from the 70s that was atrocious as fuck. But most superhero shows back then were pretty fucking bad. But yeah, even comic books, toys, action figures, everything Spider-Man. I even had the pajamas that had the wingsuit on them. So yeah, where you lifted the arms up and they had the black wings underneath the armpits. Just everything Spider-Man. So I remember when I first saw the first live-action Spider-Man movie, my breath was just taken from me. It was the greatest fucking thing I had ever seen. And then the sequel came out. It was even fucking better. And Spider-Man 3 came out. I remember that whole experience at the movie theater. Spider-Man 3 is a great movie as well. But I want to go ahead and talk about Spider-Man 1 here, and eventually move on to 2 and 3. So Spider-Man 1, let me grab a notebook here, because if I don't write my notes down, I will forget. I have a bad habit of forgetting shit all the time. So story. The story here is pretty simple. It follows the story of Peter, who is kind of a dorky, nerdy kind of guy. He looks like a member from the band Weezer. He just looks like a really nerdy guy. He is a really nerdy guy. He's picked on in school all the time. He has a crush on a girl, Mary Jane, played by Kirsten Dunst. He has a crush on her, and she's out of his league, which I don't personally agree with, but I know what the film was trying to, suggest with that. This girl is way out of his league. He's down here, she's up here. And his best friend, Harry, played by James Franco. We're not here to talk about the stuff about James Franco, so please don't mention it in the comments. We're talking about his performance in Spider-Man. They have a friendship, but their friendship ultimately becomes strained in a way because Harry and Norman, played by Willem Dafoe's relationship, is kind of strained, and he takes more of an interest in what's going on in Peter's life, Norman does, versus what's going on in his own son's life. So there's a lot of setup here for a sequel. But what this film does that The Amazing Spider-Man failed to do, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 spent its whole time trying to set up another movie. This film sets up another movie while being its own fucking movie and doing it well. I can't stress that enough. This movie sets up another movie while it's its own movie, I guess is the way I should put it. So, yeah, the story here goes into a darker twist when he has to encounter the Green Goblin, who is kind of criminally insane and borderline sadistic. This guy is crazy. Yeah, just the whole thing with the Green Goblin is just amazing. I love the way the Green Goblin is played by Willem Dafoe in this movie. I felt like Willem Dafoe was just born to play the Green Goblin. He begged Sam Raimi, please give me the part. And they even had the costume designer team redo the costumes so Willem Dafoe could do his own stunts. That's dedication, and it really shows in this film, because this film is just this film is a masterpiece to me. The writing here. The characters and all that are written really well. The story's written really well. I've already kind of touched base on the story. The characters, though, they are written well, but sometimes I feel like they could have just fleshed out the characters a little bit more. That's really my biggest flaw with the movie, is they could have fleshed out the characters just a tad more. But still, what we're given here is phenomenal. Everything's set up well for the sequel while being its own film. The love story between Peter and MJ is done really well, in my opinion. I know a lot of people don't like Mary Jane in this movie because she fucks with Peter's emotions all the time. At one point, she is dating, was it Harry the whole time in the first film, and then she makes out with Spider-Man for saving her life for the second time, and that really iconic scene when they're kissing, where Spider-Man's upside down and she's not upside down, and it's raining. There's a lot of people that have an issue with that because she is, I guess, sleeping around with Harry while making out with Spider-Man. So, my opinion, it doesn't bother me because I really don't want my characters to be 100% perfect all the time, if that makes sense. It gets kind of boring when they're just 100% perfect all the time. It's actually already established she has daddy issues. So this isn't really out of the ordinary for somebody with daddy issues. I'm not bashing people with daddy issues. I'm just telling it like it is. I'm sure I'm probably going to step on some toes by saying that, but I don't really care. I'm talking about a film here, so it's not really that big of a deal. But yeah, everything's written, characters written well, stories written well, screenplay and all that's written well. The score, composed by Danny Elfman. The score to this movie is one of my favorite film scores ever. Actually, for all three of the films, the score is really good. I don't think Danny Elfman did the third movie. I know he did the first and the second, but I don't think he did the third movie. I don't quote me on that. I'm not entirely sure. But I don't think Danny Elfman worked on the third one. So yeah, the score here, the opening titles, just love the music. The music that's playing while they're kissing in the rain, love that. I love everything about this score. I don't really have many negative things to say about this movie. Characters, we've already talked about characters. The jokes. Okay, here's my biggest issue with people that criticize this movie. They say that Spider-Man doesn't joke around in this movie.
What are you doing up there?
Staying away from you.
That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you?
It's you who's out, Gobby. Out of your mind.
Speak of the devil!
Spider-Man! I knew you two were in this together!
Hey, kiddo, let Mom and Dad talk for a minute, will ya?
Yeah, I think they wanted Spider-Man to joke around all the time in this film, which it wouldn't have worked for me, because there's times in the comic books, where Spider-Man got dark and serious. So, the fact that they wanted him to joke around all the time, it wouldn't have been entirely true to the character. It's just, I don't know, people just don't like it because he didn't joke around all the time. The jokes he does tell are genuinely funny. The comedic moments in all three of these movies are funny. But they also tell a good dramatic story as well. All three of them do. So yeah, that's always kind of annoyed me about people's criticisms with the joking, the Spider-Man not joking in these movies. He does, quite a bit. Changes to the lore, I've actually already talked about that. The only really two big changes they made is they made Mary Jane Spider-Man's first girlfriend, when in the comic books it was Gwen Stacy. I don't mind that. I never really was the biggest fan of Gwen Stacy anyway, and the organic web shooters, like I've already said. That's about really it for the lore changes with this movie. The Uncle Ben scene, though, I was kind of talking about it earlier. I want to get into a little bit more depth. That scene can be really emotional, and it's a very emotional moment for Peter in this film. The way he goes after Uncle Ben's killer, once he overhears the cop talking about, the chase that's going on, and he knows that area pretty well. I'm sure he's lived there his whole life. He knows that whole area. He knows exactly where the killer is, and just the way he goes after him, it's just, you hear the grunting and the aggression and the anger in Peter, and it's done amazing. I just can't stress that enough. And the fight scene in the warehouse was just, it had so much weight to it because of what happened before. Uncle Ben was killed. There's so much weight. There's so much anger in that fight scene. It's done so well. It's directed so well. It's written so well. Just love it. And that'll lead us into the fight scenes, which there are some pretty good fight scenes in this movie. There is the wrestling scene. which I kind of just showed you a clip of earlier. And there was the fight at the parade. That wasn't as much of a fist fight as it was him swinging around and the Green Goblin was shooting at him and throwing bombs at him. And I'm sure he probably killed quite a few people at the whole parade. But yeah, it was done well. Even though the scene where him and Mary Jane, he saves Mary Jane and they're swinging, you can see the wind where she's holding on to him, and you can see her hair blowing the opposite way. It should have been, I think it should have been blowing this way, because they were going this way, and her hair should have been blowing this way, but it was blowing that way while they were moving. That's a little mistake. That's not really, I'm just nitpicking there. It's not really that big of a deal. The fight in the burning building. That scene, I like that scene, but for me it was a little cheesy. But these movies have some cheese in them that's, it's fun. This isn't a movie that's supposed to be all dark and grim and serious. This movie knows how to have fun. Like, a lot of fun. And that's what this movie ultimately is for me. It's so much fun, and it gives me a good story. The last fight between Green Goblin and Spider-Man. Now, this is where things start getting a little different. This is actually a really violent fight. Spider-Man is getting his ass beat the fuck down in this fight scene. And Green Goblin is just no holds bars, just whipping the fuck out of him. And in a couple parts, it's kind of hard to watch because he's just getting obliterated. But then the Green Goblin just had to say that one little line that got Peter mad, where he says, "I'm going to kill her," or "I'm going to finish her nice and slow." And then that sets Peter off, and then the tides kind of turn. Now Peter's whipping his ass, and then ultimately ends up with the Green Goblin killing himself with his own glider. But of course, this whole time, Harry thinks that Spider-Man was the one that killed them, which would then be leading into the sequel, Spider-Man 2, where some of that gets fleshed out a lot more. So yeah, as a film as a whole, I don't think this is the best Spider-Man film in the trilogy. I think this one sets up Spider-Man 2 so well while being its own film and being fun and being entertaining and being filled with action. I definitely got to give this movie an A+. This movie, I used to have to watch this film every single day of my life. I just loved this movie. I still love all three of them. And I really don't have much else to say, and I'm kind of excited to talk about Spider-Man 2, and I'm sure I'll be talking about Spider-Man 2 sometime next week or the end of this week. Who knows? But, yes. If you have not seen Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1, well, I spoiled some things. You should have known better not to click on it if you're, offended by spoilers. But if it's something you don't care about and you haven't seen it, go watch it. Go watch all three of them. It's just a wonderful film. Wonderful superhero film. And, yeah, that's really all I have to say. I just kind of did a little discussion, and I really had a fun time talking about this film because I love this movie with a passion. So, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'm out. Peace.